Hi, Kieran. Today I'm working on page 7 of First Sun and Sword.
Okay, this is page 7. This is the first one beyond the first 6 that I'm posting to the website to give readers something to check out before I start just posting one per week. And I'm still figuring out camera angles and setup so that I can capture this better, and I think I've done a little better this time with that. Trying to give you guys a closer look at the penciling process and so on. So my thumbnail for this, it's very tiny, and I have not figured out on that thumbnail the exact poses, reminders of like character design, exactly where shadows will fall, and so on. So there's figuring that out on the page. You'll notice I'm holding the pencil really loosely up towards the top because I'm just trying to find shapes and not get too focused on details. The image on the right was very easy for me to tighten up right away. And also notice I went back and forth. I used to be afraid to move around on the page because I was afraid to smudge pencils. And I'm finding that I'm not doing that too much, especially if I don't, as I get more confident, we'll say, in my pencils and don't need to erase and go back over it many times, which then your hand is doing a lot more of the rubbing on the page that'll get it smudged. I'm also less worried about smudging because I'm going to erase all these pencils anyways. Something else I noticed I'm starting to do more of is to not erase my pencil and not change pencils. So I used to use a harder pencil and then switch to an H for at times to give it a little more detail. And the 5H or so, that was one that would do that initial shape finding and perspective lines and so on. I'm trying to move away from that because I don't want anything to break my flow. So when I just stick with that H pencil the whole time, something I sometimes would do more so than when I can switch back and forth between pencils is use an eraser a lot. Like if I put down a little bit of a base drawing, I might feel like I need to erase over that before I clean it up. And you'll see here with Sword, this character here, I'm just layering and layering pencils on and just pushing a little harder each time so that it's clear which one's the final line. Now, in the past, I would have wanted to erase that before inking, but that was concern for the eraser lifting inks off the page, or the pencils not being erasable. But I'm learning that like it's working fine for me. Maybe I'm not pushing too hard with the pencil. Also, I'm not erasing any. So once I do erase, the paper's ready to let it erase that time. Here I'm finding the shadows on him, so kind of an interesting framing here. The silhouette of the bug is the shadow of the bug is on the sand behind him, and I decided to have that positioned where we can tell what it is. So I had to position it over the mouth of the bug, and the way I've framed this, the shadow of the shadow where it hits the ground, it actually hits him about chest height. So below his chest is all in the shadow of the bug, and then above that he's in the sunlight, and so he'll have his shadow behind him too. And it was fun because it also has him in the mouth of the bug. His shadow falls right into the mouth of the bug, kind of that foreshadowing or anticipation there. My first big long panel of the comic. So something I try to keep in mind with my panel shapes, variety's nice, sure, but I don't really think about variety. I do think that if you think about what will serve the story well, odds are it's going to include a lot of variety. So if I just trust my gut and I go with what the story needs, I'm going to give it plenty of variety rather than setting out to make sure there's variety. So it was not a conscious effort on my part to say, oh, I need to have a tall panel now. But at the same time, there was this little problem of panel shapes matching the shape of the action that I try to avoid. So in that panel, I know we've moved on now, but I'm going to finish this comment. In that panel, the bug is rearing up, raising its head up, and it's this very tall, long shape with fore and sword at its base. And the best way to highlight that is in a really tall vertical panel. It kind of even highlights that height. But that's what I went for this time. But it's something that I try to be careful with because there is a problem with beginners' work where if they're going to show a figure, it's the size of their typical figure drawing. And then if there's like a background or an establishing shot of like a house or something, then, well, a house is bigger. So now we need a bigger panel. And then the panel sizes sort of match the size of what they're drawing. And that then it is not about storytelling. It is not about what size panel and shape panel works for the story. It's rather for their weaknesses in their art, because you learn to be able to draw a house very tiny, or at least imply a house very tiny, or capture even capturing action, like even the size of that bug. It could be captured through foreshortening and extreme, angles and stuff. That there's ways to do that captures like action and foreshortening, where instead of the sword swinging out totally to the side, needing a big long panel, the sword's coming towards the camera, towards the viewer, and then you don't need a big long panel for it. So that's something to, like, for me, it's something I actively avoid. At this point, I may not need to, actively think of that, and just trust my gut with my years of experience. But it is something over the years I have been aware of. And even I was guilty of it when it came to like establishing shots, usually being a nice big panel and then people smaller when it's like just a shot of a character. Here on this panel, I've got first Sun. He is popping up out of the sand, and here I'm erasing the face because this panel I struggled with it a bit to capture it. I want it to appear that he just burst through the sand and is gasping for air, and for me that required a very particular like facial expression to capture what I wanted to, and I didn't quite get it with that first attempt. This second attempt landed it pretty well, I feel, and it's kind of what I was imagining. It is funny how we imagine this expression of these characters, and then we're just trying to create it on the page, and sometimes we're even moving our own faces. As the artist, you move your face to kind of like match that, or you just feel it inside, and then you try to create it, and that's cartooning, and it's wonderful when it works out. Yeah, and I'm not sure. The desert here. I've wondered, is this just sand dunes with no earth underneath, or is it just dusty and dry earth, or is this like just sand? Did he go just under the sand and pulled his way up, like sort of shoveled his way up, or did he fall into an underground tunnel this bug was from, and he found a way out? It doesn't really matter too much. And the way I'm coloring this with simple colors, it's I'm okay with it not being even clear to me what this sandy desert is exactly like. I give it more of a dusty, sandy feel. It looks more like sand dunes, I believe. Okay, so this is something I've been thinking about lately. Is I want to have more panels in my comic that capture sequential action and expressions. So when you see a character like look kind of shocked, and then the next panel they're making some determined look, so you feel what they're feeling, this movement in their emotion, in action where they're doing 1, 2, 3, like multiple stepped actions. But especially with the expressions of my characters, I'm trying to do more of this. Because there is a temptation, or it's to do the easy thing, I guess. And it's easier to have less panels in your comic and to have less faces on the page. And so I'm considering using greater contrast in my panel sizes, more small panels on the page, like just very small with a face, with an expression. So that I can fit those in without slowing down the pace of the comic too much. But however I do it, I want to include more of that, and it will likely slow down the pace. I mean, it'll take more pages to get through a story when I start adding those, unless I can squeeze them in. So here I've got first son bursting through, gasping, and now pulling himself out of the dust, and that sequence of images just kind of brings it to life more. In this last panel here, I've got first son standing, now having pulled himself up out of the sand, and he is standing and facing the bug. I think it would have made sense maybe for him to be a little closer to the action if he was underground or just in the sand and then popped back up. I don't think he would have been quite this far away from the action, but it's something that I try to actually be less perfectionistic in this, because I would tend to be more perfectionistic and try to capture distances and size comparisons and so on perfectly, or just very accurately, and it's really not that important. So I am playing with the distance for dramatic effect, and for storytelling. So I've got him standing here. I put a strong shadow underneath him to kind of establish him here as a foreground element. And he's looking on at the bug and Sword and Farah fighting. And so I have him at a greater distance here because I wanted you to clearly see the full bug and Sword and Farah, and the comparison of how big it looks compared to them, and how he may feel that they're in real trouble here. Here is a lot of tangents. So a tangent is just a line, or lines that intersect or appear to be grouped in your mind. So like if they're running parallel, you might even call that a tangent. But definitely if they run into each other, and then the one silhouette and another, one shape and another are starting to get grouped in your mind, or even confused what belongs to what. So as I drew this bug, it's got 6 legs coming down, and body segments, and the wing and stuff, and his head is right there in the middle of it. And so trying to find where can I place those lines to not create any more of a tangent than I have to. And so that's something I have gotten more confident with over time, is allowing objects to intersect more, and trusting that I know where to place those lines to not create a tangent. And now we're on to the inking phase. I use an 08 for the borders. It's just a little smoother and a little bit thicker, and then I use an 05 micron for the rest. Everything went really smoothly this time with the inking. Talking about, working on how I'm doing these videos, this camera angle, it's hard to see what I'm doing because my hand is blocking the view. So I did that to try to get a straight down view on the page so that things aren't warped, or in perspective, falling away from the camera. But that means my hand's in the way on that left side of the page. So still working that out. Here with where I put the shadows on the body, I'm throwing in blocks of shadow, but leaving a edge that will, just clarify where his body is in relation to that shadow. So I threw it on both sides. I try. This is going to be a topic sometime for its own video, I think, is how I choose to use shadows, and like where I choose to leave edges to my figures that are in white, or in color once it's colored, to reveal their form in the darkness. And some artists will just do a white line, just a simple white line, and I prefer not to do that because it looks stylistic and it doesn't imply form. It doesn't imply how light behaves. It's just a line that helps you see what it is. So when I have those lines, they vary in width from one side of the leg or the other. If I even do reveal the other side, they vary in width. And rather than thinking of the line that outlines my figure in the shadow, I'm thinking of the chunk of shadow on his, let's say his leg there. I'm thinking of the chunk of shadow and what shape to give that, making sure to leave a little bit out of shadow on the edges. And so if instead of thinking of the light part, the highlighted part, you think of the shadow part and the form to that, and then the highlight tends to fall into place in a more believable way when I do that. Okay, and now the moment of truth of placing these lines without tangents in the final inks here. Now, this is a nice close-up panel where you can see better how the pencils aren't fully clear, and then I make the choice of where to put that line in inks. And there's an art to making lines that are consistent, that are more beautiful. And so there's the line is just one thickness. So there's that consistency that I give everything I do. But the amount of smoothness to the curve, or geometric, edges you give, or the amount of instability and wiggling you do, the way you turn corners. So like if you're going to make a small rectangle, really small one, do you just go around the corner with it? Or do you take the pen the same direction twice, like two lines side by side? Or do you do a rectangle? Learning where those shapes, how to draw those shapes consistently in, drawing after drawing, figure after figure, and so on. it's going to make the book more beautiful, but it doesn't take any more work. I don't have to spend more time doing it. I just get better at how I lay my lines in a more beautiful way. So that's always a work in progress, and I find it's only something that I can figure out while holding the pen I'm going to use. That's one of the reasons my pencils are loose, is because there's no amount of penciling I can do that will find how I want those lines to be placed. Because it's not just how do you want them to look, but how do you want to place them, and how I want them to look, and that sort of beauty I want them to have, consistency. That also comes with how the pen feels in my hand and how it can turn and move, which is different than the pencil. So there's no amount of penciling that's going to get those lines where I want. So might as well leave it loose, and so that I focus on the ink, focus on this phase for what it is. And I have a long way to go, I'm sure, but I still see the progress I make from older comics I've done. Really trying to here on this figure out the where I want to place the shadows on this cloak or cape. It has a hood on it, but it's like a cape. It's like my way of sneaking a superhero into this sword and sorcery book. You got this boy who is super strong and tough, and all he wears is underwear and a cape. So it's kind of like definitely funny in that way to me. So here to clarify him in the foreground and really separate that from the background, I decided to throw in some lumpy sand because he had come up out of the ground here, and then some dust kind of flowing up, and not only that shadow under him, but that line in front of him, in front of his feet, really clarifies the space that he's on versus the background action. Yeah, figuring out where to put those, what curve to make here. I've done anatomy studies, and every now and then I will revisit that to freshen up. It's always nice to see the improvement I've made from like older sketchbooks of that versus new stuff. But when it comes down to my final pages, they're pretty simplified. So like that leg, I can see the curve of the calf, and I can see like the edge of the knee there, but I've gotten better at making those curves and those little bumps in body parts look more alive and look more accurate by knowing my anatomy. If you can draw, really well, you can simplify, as I've heard people kind of say before. But it really does help. So it helps a lot to just practice my style and representing things in these simpler ways. And I spend most of my time doing that. But knowing more anatomy helps. And I will say, I don't think you have to study it necessarily. I mean, at some point you're going to probably want to, but you can trust your gut most likely that there's people that spend a lot more time studying it than I do, and I've done some of it, but where my passion lies and where my energy is and my focus, if I really focus in those things, which has more to do with these compositions and shadows and shapes, and how to like represent these things in my simple way, when I focus on that, I'm much more energized and engaged, and the work is going to get better, and I'm going to improve at a much better rate. And it could be that the solutions I find have nothing to do with anatomy. like almost like action figure kind of shapes that like things could just look like they're like a muscly guy that's popped together like an old He-Man figure, and you could draw that as your figures on the page and it could look really cool. So you might find a different solution by not focusing on it too much. For some reason, I skipped this panel and went to the bottom one first. I don't know if that was really intentional. I typically ink in order. All right, I'm going back and yeah, I pulled out the pencil here because I realized I wanted to throw a little dust in that spot, and I wanted to make sure I put it in the right place, so I penciled a bit and then did it. And now on to filling in the blacks. As I get cleaner with my inks, my ink pen work, I might just fill in the blacks in the computer. I've been flirting with that idea because this is just it takes time to put them in, and there's very large black areas, and sometimes I wonder, well, I don't have to fill all of this in, especially like a large area on a panel. Why not, like on that bug there, I could just leave that those larger areas to be filled digitally. But I don't know. An extra 15 minutes even is not a big deal, because maybe someone would, it's definitely a more valuable page to someone, I would think. Someone could purchase the original page and probably be more interested in doing that if it's finished looking. So that's why I've stuck with it mainly. And there's the finished page. The sword being in a tough spot, and yeah, and Farah's next to him. They're in it together, and sun is bursting forth and about to come to the rescue. Or is he? Find out next week. Anyways, thanks guys. Catch you next time.